Hi everybody, this is John from DM Shower Thoughts, where we find our best selves through gaming. We are a proud member of the Darkmoor Podcast Network, and you can check out our Patreon to support the show, help us get better equipment and up our production value, all that good stuff. So today what we're going to be doing is following up on our little series here of ranking the various 5th edition subclasses by tier. What this is meant to do is help you get kind of an idea of how the subclasses kind of stack up to each other, and just in general, what makes strong design versus weaker design or less powerful design. And one of the things you can do is, if you have a subclass that you really like the flavor of it, but, I say it's mechanically less powerful, it can kind of, by looking at what other subclasses do right, you can kind of homebrew your own solutions. But to get there, we first have to start by looking at the rules as written. So these tiers are based off of the class's base mechanics. Part of what kind of factors into how I tier things is, first, seeing how the class is designed versus how the game is actually played. So, for example, there are some classes that heavily rely on short rests to really shine. But when your DM is setting up a set-piece encounter and then allows a long rest and then another set-piece encounter, then a lot of those abilities aren't going to get used as often. This is not a comment on how much fun any of these subclasses are. However, this is my opinion, and I got that opinion by both playing or watching other people play a lot of these subclasses and seeing how much fun they've had with them. Sometimes you get a class with a really cool story, but the mechanics don't really support it. And really, I find that a much harder gap to fill in than, say, having strong mechanics but not having a strong story. Because really, the storytelling freedom is part of what makes Dungeons & Dragons great. And you can make up a weak story with strong mechanics by coming up with your own custom story. This said can't really be true of the opposite, where you have a really cool story, but the mechanics fail to really express the power of that story. So F tier is it fails. I can never recommend this subclass. It just either is mechanically not very strong, or another subclass pulls it off in a better way. F tier subclasses somehow take away from the core identity or the core effectiveness of their base class. D tier is usually, I don't really recommend it, mostly because it's just not very powerful. The only D tier subclass we've hit so far is the Storm Herald Barbarian. And Storm Herald, it's just because the numbers are way too low and the effects are just not really impactful. So when you're looking at a variety of different characters, you're pretty much always going to be outshone, even by another character that has a similar story concept than you. C tier is usually standard power. It's not the most powerful option, but it's not going to detract from your class's core features. They either might just not synergize well, or they're just kind of boring. So because of that, C tier, generally don't recommend it, but that doesn't mean you can't have fun with it. B tier, it's pretty strong class design, but just more situational. So with B tier, if you have the right campaign setting or the right party composition, B tier classes can actually shine and be really memorable. I find that these ones have tended towards having a very strong story. It's just that the general effectiveness of their mechanics is a little bit lower than their cousins up in A tier. A tier is solid class design. I have nothing mean to say about it. They have features that really allow the class to shine kind of all over the place. The only thing separating them from S tier is that S tier subclasses have mechanics that are really strong and lend themselves to powerful story moments. And usually with an S tier subclass, I can kind of recommend it above all the other ones. There's just something that it does that really kind of changes the way that the class is presented. We haven't had very many S tier subclasses, but as we're looking at the Rogue today, maybe that's going to change. I don't know. First off, to kind of start with the Rogue in general, last time I did this with the Ranger, I started with kind of a rant about how poor Ranger's base class features are, in conveying the unique thing about Ranger. The same cannot be said about Rogue. When I did the original 13 official class breakdown, Rogue was one of a few A-tier subclasses or classes in overall design. It's the way that it writes out sneak attack is brilliant. It conveys a distinct style of play in and out of combat. You get expertises right away. Expertise is one of those skills it's very powerful in 5th edition. I don't even think I really like the design, because a lot of times rogues with an expertise in a certain skill are going to almost always outcompete other classes that are more known for that skill. So let's just say a rogue has expertise in religion. They're going to know more about religion than a cleric. Or a rogue that has an expertise in arcana. It's always going to be better at arcana checks than a wizard. And I'm not sure how I really feel about that. I do think that expertise has its place in 5th edition. Just its implementation in which classes get access to it and which classes don't is just kind of odd. And it really can change a party's dynamic very easily. As I move through each subclass, this idea of ability scores and expertises is going to be a part of the conversation. So like always, what we're going to do is we're going to break down the subclasses in order of their release, starting with the player's handbook. So the first subclass we have is the Thief, and Thief is meant to be kind of the archetypal rogue, right? It's supposed to be the generic vanilla option. Thief is a pretty solid class design. I mean, its second story work is kind of situational. This kind of character can really come to life in, say, a dungeon crawl or an urban campaign. Something like that where they can really take advantage of any kind of verticality, or anytime they can kind of use their fast hands against traps and stuff. Thief really kind of supplements the rogue's out-of-combat abilities, especially at the lower levels. But as it gets up, it gets some pretty powerful abilities. Its capstone at 17 level lets it take an extra turn, which means if you slap alert on your Thief and you have a high enough initiative count, you might be able to sneak attack and surprise an enemy unit twice in the same turn, or just pull other shenanigans. Thief has a lot of what look like situational abilities, but really are kind of strong. Like the ability to just use any magic item is a pretty neat thing. So Thief is one of those classes that I'm giving it a B tier ranking, because if you don't build it with the setting in mind, you might feel like you don't get the chance to really use a lot of its core abilities. But I don't have anything mean to say about the Thief. I think it's really cool that, the class's combat identity is so solid in its base design that its subclass design can be freed up to kind of be it's freed up so that you're looking at more than just its combat effectiveness. You're looking at its storytelling potential. And really, I think every subclass should be like that, but it can't be, because not every class has as strong a combat mechanical identity as the Rogue does. Next one we have up is the Assassin. I'm giving Assassin the A tier treatment. This one, it's just, Assassinate is really good. It honestly is kind of meh in terms of the storytelling. Like, especially if you compare it to Thief, it has a lot less application in more than just one area. Assassin is definitely more focused, and it has an even more unique ambush style than the Thief. I've seen Assassins deal a boatload of damage before, and really its emphasis on just getting the most out of your sneak attack really does tell a very specific rogue story. Even though it's A tier, I do find Assassin a little more boring than Thief and our next subclass. But remember, we're looking at this also from a how the game is played perspective. And of all the rogues I've seen at the table, players that like Assassin really like Assassin because they know that they're being effective, and they know that at some point there's going to be combat, and at some point they're going to get the chance to use their sneak attack. So because of that, I'm going to give Assassin A tier while Thief is B tier, but that doesn't necessarily mean I think that it's more fun than the Thief. The next one I have up on the list is Arcane Trickster. Arcane Trickster, I'm also giving the A tier. Arcane Trickster is one that is a lot more situational. It's kind of like Eldritch Knight in that it's considered a third caster, but its main schools of magic are illusion and enchantment, which you would want for a trickster character. The thing with it too is that it lets you pick up shield, which is a really powerful defensive option, and you know, you get the chance to steal on enemy caster's spell at really high levels. Not to mention all the shenanigans you can pull with the Arcane Trickster's version of Mage Hand. I really like Arcane Trickster's design. I think that it immediately evokes... Oh gosh! Oh, that really hurt. I think Arcane Trickster evokes a certain character personality that can express itself in a lot of different ways. And because of that, I think it finds a nice balance between combat, out of combat, story flavor. Rogue has sneak attack to fall back on, so you can have your fun with Arcane Trickster without having to really worry that you're going to not be effective in combat. Its ability to also distract someone with its mage hand while it goes up and pokes them, it's also just a lot of fun. So Arcane Trickster, I think, is a very versatile character, and I think it can fit in a lot of different party compositions, and it's got enough, it leans in towards enough fun mechanics, like illusion and enchantment, that you can have an enjoyment at any level. Which now brings us to Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. So the reason I'm breaking this up like this is the 2 Sword Coast Rogue archetypes got reprinted in Xanathar's Guide for Everything, but technically they did come out first, so I'm going to address them first. I found it really interesting what subclasses Wizards was interested in designing for Faerun and which ones they weren't. These next 2 are pretty interesting, and they could make for good heroes or villains. So the first one is the Mastermind Rogue. Mastermind is one that in a lot of build guides and stuff, I see Mastermind usually considered like a lower powered subclass, and I honestly, having seen it in play, I'm giving it a B tier treatment. Reason being is because I have seen Mastermind work extremely effectively in a few different parties. Its ability to bonus action help at a distance is extremely underrated. Like, that's a really nice ability. Especially if you have more than one rogue in the party, it basically guarantees that that other rogue can also get its sneak attack off consistently. A lot of its higher level abilities are kind of situational and more based on social interaction. I can see why, if somebody's looking at it as in like, let's take a look at all the modules of D&D and plop a Mastermind Rogue next to an Arcane Trickster, why they might feel it's a lot less generally effective. Again, part of B tier is how strong it can be in a certain campaign setting. And like Whisper's Bard, if you drop a Mastermind Rogue into some kind of social interaction setting, it's really gonna shine and have a lot of clear storytelling memories. The other one we get is the Swashbuckler Rogue. Swashbuckler Rogue immediately addresses one of Rogue's biggest issues, which is, how does it get sneak attack if it doesn't have a team that's willing to work with it? Rogue is one of these kind of, it's got a weird relationship with the team. Adamus has brought this up before, that like legacy thieves would have this thing where they'd steal from the party, or they'd be kind of more like lone wolves. But sneak attack really discourages the lone wolf approach to combat. I mean, I guess you could use your cunning action to hide and give yourself advantage that way, but the way I've seen most D&D games work, especially with their rogue, if the party is unwilling to help the rogue get positioned to use its sneak attack, the rogue's effectiveness can really fall off. Swashbuckler addresses this by immediately at 3rd level, creating certain conditions that if the rogue meets them, they can basically sneak attack without worrying. They get this kind of duelist mentality where, you know, if they can get one-on-one duel with a bad guy, they can deal it a lot of damage, which I think is really nice and really flavorful. And it also points out that the rogue's base mechanics, because they're pretty much all revolving around dexterity, The Rogue has its pick of what its secondary ability is going to be. The Swashbuckler takes advantage of a Rogue that decides to allocate its ability scores to Charisma. You can, if you're thinking through that your character wants to be a Swashbuckler in advance, then they can allocate their skill proficiencies to their Charisma skills, maybe even take expertise in them. So a Swashbuckler could be an awesome face of the party, maybe even more so than like a Bard or a Sorcerer, right? The combination of being able to sneak attack on its own, its use of Charisma to add to initiative, and just a lot of its kit. Unfortunately, I have to give Swashbuckler the S tier treatment. I think Swashbuckler outcompetes the other rogue subclasses in a way that the others just can't keep up. The next one we get, the last two we get are from Xanathar's Guide to Everything, starting with the Inquisitive Rogue. Inquisitive, unfortunately, has this really weird way that the mechanics tried to represent the story of an investigator. It's gonna get a C tier rating from me. Part of this is that it almost asks the player to force their character to have multiple ability score dependency and really, you know, pump a lot of stat into its wisdom and intelligence scores. It's got a neat sneak attack condition, kind of like Swashbuckler, where by studying the creature, you can use your sneak attack even if you don't have advantage. But again, that is a lot less useful than the Swashbuckler's ability to go in on its own and then disengage in the same attack and the same movement, and basically reserve its cunning action to dash. So there's a synergy that Swashbuckler does with its conditional sneak attack that you don't get with the Inquisitive. Inquisitive, I think, is a great idea that's just not executed very well. So for that, I give it the C tier. Definitely not the worst subclass in 5th edition, but among the rogue subclasses, the other choices are more powerful. And that leaves us with the Scout Rogue. And for those of you that talk to me a lot, I have a lot of nice things to say about Scout Rogue. I think the fact that it gets 2 additional expertises at 3rd level is really cool. The only thing that bothers me is because of the way the rules is written, Scout Rogue doesn't make sense from a story arc perspective. It basically means for levels 1 to 2, you have no proficiencies in nature or survival, and you're just like, these berries must be good for me, and then somehow magically at 3rd level you have expertise in those 2 skills, and you're like, you turn into the Witcher, right? And you're just like, tracks that way, look fur, I think from an arc perspective, it's kind of weird. But from raw mechanics, bonus expertises is pretty cool. Skirmisher is a decent reaction. It gets more powerful as you go, and especially the speed boost at level 9. It's such a little thing that ends up making a big difference. Like, remember, when your speed increases, your dash distance basically doubles, and dashing for a rogue is a bonus action. So it really does set up a lot of nice combos. Its sudden strike is a pretty powerful mechanic that allows you to get out of a lot of hairy situations, but I do think that it isn't as powerful as Swashbuckler. So I'm gonna give Scout Rogue A tier, mostly just personal bias. I really like it. My favorite character I've ever played was mainly a Scout Rogue, and I think it's got some neat things to add to a party composition, and it's a better Ranger than the Ranger. Yeah. So, now I want to know what you guys think. Do you agree with my picks? Do you want to argue with me or anything like that? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to game responsibly. Alright? Bye-bye now.